Georgina, welcome, and thank you. Well, if you read everything, then all my titles, then it will take all the time of the presentation. Yeah, well, it's probably so, but we did need to mention that. So please, Georgy Borisovich. Well, this were another several objects participating in the presentation: the subject of the presentation, then the content of the presentation, and the view how it's presented, and that has that complexity. I'll try to overcome that.
Сократиться, хотя должен сказать, что тема, которую я...
So I'll try to be brief, but well, the topic I would like to share with the colleagues, it is by all means important and interesting, and probably far from being complete. And the message is called the keynote is the theory of systemic cycles in space and time. And there is quite a claim here, meaning that cycles the economy deals with period-wise, and the cycles it has to do in a spatial development. But these cycles are interdependent. And there is a module of transfer which can transfer the description of one cycle into the description of others. And the key word here, systemic cycles. And the notion of systemic cycle, I think it makes it possible to overcome the space and time, and it transcends not only the space but also time. So in my opinion, the use of systemic ideology and conceptology, it would allow to break down this duality and transition to the uniform review of time and space continuum. If you could show the next slide, please. So we'll know the theory of economic cycles, starting with Nikolai Kondratiev, who is a world-renowned classic, and we can also mention the Chizhevsky cycles and Kitchen cycles, and all that is well studied and well founded. Suggestions about repeatability and repetition, because cycles are the repetition of certain notions, and the repetition of those notions which Kondratiev wrote and other cycles. And so there's a lot of literature about that, which talks about factors thanks to which there is this effect of repetition in time. And we can also recall the theory of Odysseus and the theory of development, where there's a stage of maturity and decline. It is also well known. And here I would also mention the theory of crisis cycles. Those are cycles which we all know well, and we've experienced that for the past 30 years, the whole range of those crises. And those crises are characterized by the first phase of crisis, then the post-crisis phase, the restoration, then there is a small stage of interim crisis, and then pre-crisis. And so there is, it's obviously a cycle which we can call crisis. And finally, and what theorem presented with is based on that systemic cycle. And it would be good to see the functioning of the socioeconomic systems of different level, macro level and even mega level and micro level at a standalone enterprise. And it would be nice to see the aspects of cycle. We do see those while work in organizations, and we see the cycles of decline and uprise. But what controls those cycles? This is an open question, and this notion of systemic cycles, which is the basis one for this keynote, it comes from the understanding or from the hypothesis of a certain composition of different economic systems. And I've been working on the article about the works of Alexander Bogdanov, and 2 months ago we had a conference in the Finance University dedicated to the memory of Bogdanov as the author, so the general theory of organization, and as a precursor of many ideas, and even the science of the 22nd century hasn't reached those ideas yet, despite there was a period of development of systems by Ludwig Bertolacci and others, but the number of ideas of Bogdanov regarding the scale and depth, well, they only now penetrate our conscience. And to a certain extent, what I would like to talk about today is like a shadow or reflection of Bogdanov's ideas. You could give the next slide, please. So here, I wanted to say famous, but it is a known picture. A known picture, it is a representation of a system. A system, object system, environment system, project system, and process system. I will not be going into details about what those systems are, but these are the four incarnations of the system. So if you take an enterprise, it's an object which was born and develops in time. Then it's an environment within which the participants of the activity of the enterprise are working. On the third side, that's a total of sum total of processes taking place in their object, and they determine the flow of material values and information values and regulations, etc. Fourth, this is the place of projects, organization, technological, and other. I will not be using the word innovations. It is too loaded and it doesn't have a definite meaning. Well, different people understand it differently, but I will be talking about the activities. So the essence of activities is that certain resources, they are brought together in one place, they are united by a common goal, and they're used to develop that initiative that can be producing a new item. It can be a new scheme of the organizational administration, etc. So projects. And so the cornerstone is that any system has these four incarnations. That's the first part of the cornerstone. And the second part is that these four parts, they are not just interrelated with each other. So they are related with each other via reality, but the most important, that's like so that can be proven. And if we take such systems as an example, we can see how, if we go clockwise, we'll see how these systems interact. For example, if some product is produced by the enterprise and then it goes into the external environment where it is sold, and then the profit is received, which in its turn is used to replenish the resources, to sustain the functioning of the enterprise, and thanks to which the object of the enterprise moves from one period into another one, from today to tomorrow, or from today's month into tomorrow, and hence it continues, proceeds using its ties, connections with the space inside and outside, its connection with the processing side and outside. So this is the original, the baseline scheme, which makes it possible for us to talk about systemic cycles. Please, next slide. And we have 4 players. And so for micro players in any system, the player that can be called object, then medium or environment, then process, and project. Each of the players has its own structure. And the point here is that these 4 players, they interact. And since they interact, then they are in certain relationships. And the idea is that they don't just share the results of their work, but that they also take a certain position in the hierarchy within the system. So what's this hierarchy within the system? It is a standard, the hierarchy, which is based on domination. So each period of time, one of these systems dominates. And it should be noted, this is a suggestion. The alternative might be that 2 systems might dominate, or the whole 3 of them, and one is left behind. But the truth is, if the truth is that each given state, one of the systems dominates, and they dominate in turn, and they dominate like going clockwise. And this is how the components of the system are interrelated. And namely, well, first, in the beginning, well, there is no beginning as such. The beginning emerges when the system emerges, when the object emerges. And once it happened, once there is object, then domination starts. So first it's the object part that dominates, then the type, the kind part is that dominates, then process part, and then the project part. So, and why this baton is being passed on? because when the object part dominates, this is the period of construction. So it is the enterprise that's being constructed, or a country. And then there is a phase when, so so here what we see, once this object is built, then its functions propagate, and then the environment of this propagation plays a role, and the processual part, which propagates it in a space. And it happens until it encounters a new reorganization, the project, because a project is always a reorganization. It is always an activity, a novelty, if you like. And thus we can review the history of our country starting in since 1950s. If you could back to the previous slide, we can look at it as the history of the process of these phases into placing each other, or these phases alternate. And of course, there's been significant changes in the 50s in the Soviet Union after the death of Stalin. Then the Khrushchev epoch, which was called voluntarism. Then there was the epoch, the time of the Brezhnevs era, which then developed into stagnation. And how it ended, well, let's look at the next slide. How it ended? Well, it ended as always by perestroika, a new building. Or reorganization. Well, the slide did not switch. Yes, we cannot get stuck within this same era, especially if it's stagnation. Well, honestly, I would prefer to stay there for some time. Yes, we do agree with you here. Well, and we need, but still we need to move on. Time's running out. And so it's clear what's really next. Then there's the certain forecast. So this cycle we're evolving in, it doesn't change. What changes are just the names, the titles like stagnation, voluntarism, restructuring, reconstruction, reorganization, etc. Yes, we can discuss whether it is the way the life is organized, but it looks like it is so, and it gives us possibility to forecast, although this theory does not give a question to the answer of when the stagnation is going to end, when there is a new reconstruction, a reorganization process, when it's going to happen. It just answers the question of what, which would already be good. It doesn't answer the question why, because these are the systemic properties of life. And another illustration is connected with the name of Boris Slutsky, a famous Russian poet, one of the best poets in the end of the 50s, and who he wrote these lines: what's honored by physics was discarded by lyrics. The thing is not about the calculation, the thing is about the global law. And what kind of law did he mean? Well, Slutsky didn't answer that, but I think the concept which I was able to share with you answers about what law this is. And this is the law of alternation of leadership, domination of subsystems. And we can point out, we can single out leaders there. And if you could show the next slide. So, yes, there are these physicists, and they represent the object incarnation of our world, and the physicists and those who the lyrics or clerics rather are those who maintain the environment. Clerics, well, it doesn't just mean a churchman, it's just clerics, although and using lyrics, people who can feel better than others the changes in the public senses, they just propagate, spread that in the environment, and then they yield leadership to the leaders of change, those who want change at any cost. And here, leaders on the slide, they're called nut jobs. Well, do not consider it as a person who is schizophrenic, but it's just a feature of character, of nature, when a person is not satisfied with the conditions, surrounding conditions. And these are people who believe these conditions can be changed. And then they take the initiative, they lead the people, and they result in the end of this epoch, era of change. And that era of change ends with the era of new building and new arrangement. And this is another illustration of the same law. No doubt that the object and the environmental and other subsystems, they need administration. And we can track what psychological personal traits make it possible for one person to be a leader during the era of change and allow another person to be a leader during the era of stagnation. And it doesn't have to be an era within a country, it can be a era within the life of a company. And those psychological traits, they can be identified, and it's not difficult to do that. And what I would like to emphasize here is that every organization has social leaders which incorporate these qualities. Four types of social leaders: inspirational leader, who leads the object part, and then the cultural leader with the processual part, spiritual leader who determines the environmental part, determines the climate, and finally the intellectual leader who sees farther and broader and makes it possible to talk about change, that this can be expected for the system. And this next table, yes, if you could show it, please. What do we have here? is the classification of functions. And the functions of the enterprise is compared with the activity of those 4 leaders. Unfortunately, we don't see the slide. We see slide 11. That's the field structure of the organization. Oh, my apologies. My mistake. Well, it's just a good table which connects the concept, EASET concept, with leadership, with social leadership. And hence it determines the function of each of those leaders in what EASET called E function, I function, A function, and P function. All these functions, they grow from the same root. So what's next? And we have a field structure, and it is clear that if we have these leaders, then each of the leader creates the field of attraction around them, or the field of intellect and inspiration, the spiritual field, which gives meaning, creates meaning, gives the answer to the question, what for? Because when we do something, we don't usually ask ourselves why we do that, but there are people who for whom it's important, and it's then that we have spiritual leaders, sometimes religious leaders, and sometimes these visionaries. And I've published an article in the journal Questions of Economics, and there's discussion on this division of leadership, what role it plays in the organizations. We shouldn't believe that one person can implement spiritual and inspirational and intellectual and spiritual leadership. That needs to be divided, broken down into 4 components, and there must be a leader within each component. And then what we'll get is the picture when we ensure a seamless leadership, barrier-free, what we call sustainable development. So that could be transferred to formal and informal administration institutions, and there's a brief characteristics of those institutions given here. And that's important for applied purposes, for the purposes of, but I will not be going into that for the purposes of this keynote. So what I would like to say, well, unfortunately, I didn't manage to show one more example here, specifically that every country can have the properties of object system or environmental system or processual system, like China, like project system, like the United States. And I talked about it in other. What's important here is that the movement of leadership, Georgy Borisovich, the slide froze again. This is the last one. This is the last one. We have, yes, no more slides. We have resolved the problem with the slides. So the problem I'm talking about is that leadership, if there is correct development of the global economic system, it should shift between the countries, and specifically object environmental, processual, and object type. And with this distribution of leadership, in the global socioeconomic system, or global market, if you like. So with this system, we'll have what is called sustainable development of the global socioeconomic system. So both, it is true both time-wise and space. And space-wise, we've seen that as example of leaders within organization. What I believe is most important here, and the theory of systems that's been developed, it combines spatial and time development. And I believe this is its strength. And what I've mentioned, what I've shown the example of combination of the cycles in time and in space. Thank you for your attention.